Hello, everyone. My name is Luis Nisiodis. I'm the organizer of this roundtable event for the IEEE Future Directions and the IEEE Metaverse Initiative. I would like to personally thank you for joining our virtual world roundtable discussion this morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are located around the world. Just a few words about me. I'm with the University of Central Lancashire doing research in intelligent reality systems and extended reality technologies. I teach games and computer graphics, and my interests in research focus on VR, cyber-physical systems, digital twins, games, and immersive learning. So we're pleased to welcome you to this IEEE Futures Directions virtual roundtable discussion, which its focus is going to be the user adoption of the metaverse. We now live in an era of digital transformation and digital revolution. So we do want to try to understand and shape the future of this immersive paradigm. So today's event is hosted in the FrameVR environment, and we would like to take a minute and thank the Frame team for their invaluable support. We encourage you to immerse yourself in the experience, but also respect the structure of the event. So to facilitate a smooth and engaging discussion, we kindly ask all participants to remain virtually seated and to share your thoughts and if you have any questions, please use the chat feature on the top left of your screen. Our moderators will be monitoring the chat and will bring your questions into our live discussion. Now, at the end of the event, feel free to explore the virtual environment. The space will remain open for you to network and interact with other participants. Now, I would like to present the panelists of this event, starting with the roundtable moderator, which is Tom Coughlin. Tom is the 2023 IEEE President-elect and the President of Coughlin Associates. He's a digital storage analyst and business technology consultant with more than 40 years in the data storage industry, with engineering and senior management positions on several companies. During the years, you also had a range of directing, management, and chairing positions within IEEE. And Tom will be our moderator for today. So thank you very, very much for joining us, Tom.
You're welcome. Oh, so I am the president this year, by the way, and my day job, I work in digital storage and memory and live in Silicon Valley.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. Our first guest will be Geotica Athervale, the 2024 President of the IEEE Computer Society. Geotica is a director and principal architect at Synopsys, leading Silicon Health and Life Management RAS architecture for automotive and data center use cases. Prior to Synopsys, she was lead technologies functional safety architecture at NVIDIA, and prior to NVIDIA, she was a principal engineer at Intel Corporation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. Welcome, everyone, and looking forward to this great discussion. Thanks for joining us, and thank you, Luis, for the introduction.
Yeah, thank you so much, Geotica, for joining us. Following, our second panelist is Dr. Mar Gonzalez-Franco. Mar is a computer scientist and neuroscientist at Google, working on new generation immersive technologies. Mar's got a background in real-time systems, and in her research, she tries to build better interactions for immersive technologies using different disciplines like virtual and augmented reality, avatars, computer graphics, computer vision, and haptics. So, Mar, thank you so much for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to participate on this panel.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And our last panelist is Nicholas Knapp, the co-founder of XMark Labs. Nick is focused on the role of extended reality in enterprise digital transformation. He enjoys working at the intersection of strategy, technology, and corporate narrative to accelerate business growth. During his career, he's worked in a variety of projects in Internet of Things, VR, AR, and blockchain. He's launched over 40 products across a wide range of consumer and enterprise markets, and his clients include major corporations such as AT&T, Hilti, HTC, Microsoft, Sony, Tencent, and among other companies. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Brilliant. So now let's start our discussion by giving the virtual floor to our moderator, Tom. Tom, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And so I'm glad we could be here, and thank you everybody who's joining us today. So to start off our discussion, I want to ask something about the sort of infrastructure and equipment needed. Ideally, we're trying to make something that's going to be more like reality. Right now, apparently, we can get our lips to move, though not necessarily like we're actually saying what we're saying, and it actually will blink our eyes to match our blinking our eyes. But what would it take to get even more immersive experience, both in terms of local hardware, maybe in bigger infrastructure? So, folks, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think it's kind of interesting that we're all joining here, but no one is really wearing a headset.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we consider headsets to be far more immersive, right? In a way, I think it's not totally off that we're doing it this way, because most of the people will not have access to headset for the longest time, right? It's a bit like when the smartphones arrived and people were still using feature phones, right? So the fact that we have some infrastructure that works without a headset, but you can also add a headset if you want. I think that's a good approach to keep this thing accessible for everyone, right? So, and so for me, it's clear the path towards more immersiveness is to start having these first-person experiences rather than just joining through a laptop.
So quickie on that, in terms of the headsets, what is the issue with headsets today? There's been some announcements and some products out there. It still seems like they're kind of heavy. They're not that comfortable and convenient. Is that the issue? And if so, how do you think that's going to be resolved, or will it be?
Well, I think in the recent months, we've seen a big shift on precisely the comments that you're making on how much of a product is this versus a prototype, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
However, I also think there are other fundamental issues with this. I have headsets around me, and still I join with my PC, right? And I think there are things about operating systems allowing you to multitask, right? I have here my chat from work on the side in case there is a fire or something, right? And I don't think that is currently so well allowed by the systems, the headsets. People talk a lot about ecosystems, but I think an operating system is the basis of an ecosystem. And the ability to multitask certainly hinders me and many other people who have been going to conferences that are virtual, in IEEE VR, ISMAR. There were many of these conferences that were running similar to FrameVR.
Yeah. Also, I can add there. Yeah, just a little bit about things, Tom, about the challenges from a hardware standpoint. Given this new use case, we still need to work on how can we best optimize, the power, performance, and reliability needs for this, new use case. So, for example, you use the headset now, but maybe just for a short duration, and then we have to charge it again. Just given all of those challenges.
Yep.
So that's the intensity of the compute and the demands, with respect to meeting the reliability requirements as well as maintaining the power versus performance trade-offs still need to be worked out. So I think all of those are challenges that we still need to address in the future as we continue to work towards taking this technology to maturity.
So, Jatika, how long do you think it's going to take before we can make something that, like none of us are wearing virtual goggles or on stage here right now, unless Nick is different. But, how long before it is something that people feel comfortable, that it's got enough power, it's immersive enough that it's interesting to use? Jawika, what do you think? How far from that are we now, do you think?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we did actually, this was one of the technologies that was on our list on the 2024 Technology Predictions Report that the Computer Society published just recently, and it was ranked at number 19 out of the top 22 technologies that were listed there and prioritized using various criteria. Now, from technological development in 2024 and maturity, was given a grade of C plus. Going from A to
Not a
C
high
level.
grade.
Not a high grade, yeah. So I think,
Yeah.
and based on that, it was positioned as a prototype. So, we had the various categories: very early, prototype, incubating, emerging, mature, and broad adoption. So it's still at that, based on our report, it's still at that prototype phase. So, we still have some more work to do, in the coming years. But for this year, that's how we are positioning it.
Sure. Nick, do you have any comments
Yeah.
on that?
I sure do.
I'll bet.
And some of them may be a little controversial. I think there's a bigger issue here, right? I've been dabbling with virtual reality for almost 30 years, off and on, and there is simply no good reason for me to wear a headset all day at the moment. And of the headsets that are available, I don't think there is a single one that would actually be comfortable to wear for even, more than a couple of hours. And I think, this is not a criticism. It's really just a statement. When you look at the headset from Apple, whether you love Apple or you hate Apple, I think it is, they've got a pretty solid track record of design and user interaction, and really working hard to polish that and make it the best they possibly can. And the result is a thing that looks like a fairly uncomfortable scuba mask, right? And if that's what one of the, well, certainly one of the wealthiest companies on the planet, but one of the ones that historically, for the last decade or more has been super focused on the user experience, if that's the best they can do, that leaves me a little worried about the state of things. I think we're kind of ignoring to some extent this proverbial elephant in the room of, what is the metaverse actually for? And what does metaverse even mean? Because I
What's
think
the killer app or something?
Yeah, because I think we would all agree in principle that the idea of the metaverse is fundamentally a shared and some sort of persistent experience. But beyond that, I think there's a deep lack of clarity. And it may well be that there's not a single killer app, right? It may just be an amalgamation of things that are useful. But it's very hard for me, even as a proponent of the technology, to see a Ready Player One type scenario that the entire world is going to hop into for multiple hours a day. I can't see that happening. I think an AR or XR experience, or mixed reality is far more likely. But there's even a fundamental question about how picky do we want to be about the fact that it has to be 3D. I mean, there's clearly a spatial element, but if you basically take the idea of a shared and persistent experience, to some extent we get that from social media and Google Maps. And if you add 3D, sure, you can get that in games like Fortnite and Minecraft. But I don't think any of us really see the metaverse as either Google Maps at one end or Minecraft at the other. So yeah, I do think the hardware still has some fundamental challenges that really just go to the core of what exactly do we want to do with this, and what really is the benefit.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Hey, by the way, I noticed that there's comments that come up here, questions from the audience, and be good to capture these. I think there's some good statements there, and maybe some questions that even if we can't address all of them now, we can try to do that later on, for example. Brings up something interesting. Considering that the bandwidth requirements are somewhat high, processing high as well, the headsets or the devices we use, unless we do like what we're doing now, is fairly expensive. Is this the technology as it's being used, is it a path towards making this universally available, or if this ever catches on, is that going to be, there will be haves and have-nots in terms of access to the technology and the ability to do the experience, assuming you can find something that really makes this useful and sort of indispensable in our lives. Jyotika, you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. No, it's a great question, Tom, and I think it's very relevant. So, I think there's several benefits, so to speak, and use cases where democratizing this technology will be beneficial to the users. We're just coming out of a pandemic situation where the remote work was a challenge. Having more of this interaction in the virtual environment, better interaction will and more immersive experience will make that more effective. With respect to our remote work culture, there's also other uh, I guess one of the key benefits that we looked at from the technology predictions aspect was, the use of metaverse for industrial applications, RAS sensitive or reliability sensitive use cases, safety critical use cases such as autonomous driving or data centers where, we are looking for predictive maintenance kind of capabilities, the simulations with the digital twins, enhancing the speed of faster design, prototyping, etc., and also increase steam. So those are some things, but then there's also use cases for e-commerce, shopping, gaming, virtual tours, healthcare. So I think lots of ways in which the metaverse can be beneficial to the end user, both from an industrial standpoint as well as, the other from a day-to-day perspective.
So we've kind of focused on the virtual reality side of it, but there's more than that. It's that, augmented reality, you combine, what's actually going on around you with some information source, maybe video, maybe text, maybe other things that you get maybe through some glasses or some other type of feedback. And I think that, and I know I've gone to some of the shows and stuff, it seems like people are selling hardware, especially AR glasses that might be used so you can be hands-free, be able to like do maintenance on a piece of equipment. You can see the specs and the equipment in your glasses. Your hands can be free to do work. Jyotika, do you think that's going to be, is that possibly the first thing that's going to take off in these areas, or do you think there's issues with that as well?
So I think with respect to taking these to market, I think there's still, issues with respect that need to be, considered. There's issues with respect to security and privacy, for example. There's work going on currently in standards to understand, how to address some of those challenges. There'll be work that we will need to do with the regulations and regulatory before taking this technology to market. So I think those are some of the upcoming topics that we are working on actively in IEEE. We have a Metaverse Power Study Group, addressing some of those topics. We have, like we talked about, the predictions report. We are publishing articles in our IEEE Security Privacy magazine on some of the challenges we're seeing there, and of course also the benefits from, but yeah, I guess from a challenge standpoint, it's this, but then there's other aspects like sustainability that we're also looking at.
Yeah, those are really good points, Jyotika. So Nick, maybe you next. In terms of what are the near-term opportunities here? What are what are those issues that keep this becoming mainstream? And I guess the other one was, is augmented reality for industrial use, for instance, is that maybe one of the things that might be sooner to take off rather than later?
Yeah, so to take the AR versus VR thing first, there's pros and cons to both, right? In an industrial environment, there is a lot of utility in having an augmented overlay on your real world environment, right? So here's the machine I'm trying to service or use, or the process I'm trying to follow, and here's a real-time overlay that helps me with that. But there's also value in having a VR experience that is isolated and away from the equipment. So, for example, you know, if someone's doing a training scenario, if they can do that without tying up your $1 million laser cutting machine, because they're off in a room and it's a completely virtual experience, that has some value too. And you know, it was interesting as we were talking about potential use cases a few minutes ago. Those are all sort of I think everything that was mentioned is, you know, well-established AR and VR use cases. And again, I'm not really clear or entirely enthusiastic about how the metaverse is actually different. Like, you know, we've been talking about a lot of those use cases for more than a decade, and where they've been implemented, they've been very successful, but there's a lot of barriers to getting there, principally around the cost of creating those actual experiences, and then, you know, having the support and so forth. Because the simple truth is that, like, for example, a manufacturing company, if they go ahead and implement an extensive AR program, you know, do they actually have an IT department in-house that is capable of supporting that infrastructure? And the odds are pretty good that they don't, because that's not something they've needed to do before. But to touch on some of the other points that you brought up, you know, I think we do have some pretty significant societal and ethical concerns that need to be looked at a lot more carefully. You know, I think it is fair to say that as a planet full of people, we are barely coping with social media and the various implications of that. And we really don't have much in the way of tools and constructs, either as a society or from a technology point of view, to kind of ensure good behavior. And I don't remember who this quote came from, but I thought it was an excellent example. You know, in tech, there's a tendency to sort of lean towards kind of a libertarian, you know, everybody will find their own way, minimal rules kind of open market approach. And the person that came up with this said, you know, if you want an example of how well that works, just look at shopping carts in you know, at any grocery store, and there's no rule that says you need to put your grocery cart back. And some people do, right? But the vast majority of people will leave carts in places where they might be dangerous for other people. They might, you know, cause inconvenience, and it was solely convenient for them. And that's kind of a best case. So I think, you know, I think we have some very real issues around ensuring good behavior, or at best putting, you know, at least, I mean, putting guardrails in place. On the ethical side, I think you've got two wholly separate sets of issues. One is how companies will actually use the technology. So, for example, it's probably about 4 years ago, I saw a paper at SIGGRAPH where they were using eye tracking in a VR headset to figure out, obviously, where people were looking, but to place basically they were able to steer where somebody was looking by triggering basically a flashing pixel, but short enough that you weren't consciously aware that had happened. But they were able to demonstrate that they could basically get you to look at a particular point on the screen. And obviously a significant percentage of our big tech companies make a lot of money from advertising. And so subconsciously steering users towards looking at particular ads could increase monetization. And therefore, I think we have to say is at least moderately likely that somebody's going to try that. And we just don't have even a, you know, sort of collective societal opinion on whether that's good or bad, right? I have my personal opinion, but there's no repercussions for doing that at the moment, and there's very little discussion about it. The other separate bucket, I
would like to reply on some of these things that.
Oh, sure, Mar, you were going to be next. Go ahead.
And so the other thing, just to wrap up, is on the ethical side, is that it's not just that the digital divide is growing, it's that it's accelerating. So people get left behind, sure, but they're getting left behind further and faster as we deploy these new technologies. And that's a really tough problem to solve, because it goes to education, it goes to the hardware, it goes to the infrastructure, societal barriers. You know, it's a very big problem. But the simple fact is that the digital divide is accelerating, not just merely increasing. And that's something that, you know, for those of us that can afford this technology and are familiar with it, you know, we stand to be accelerated significantly ahead of our peers who aren't in that position.
Thank you, Nick. Amar, so by the way, I think this is a demonstration that, you know, this isn't the same as if we were here in person in the same place where you like see each other's body language and catch, you know, when someone had a comment to make. Mark, go ahead if you'd like to make some comments on these.
Sure. So first of all, I do see a bit of a lag on regulation. I agree with that with Nick, but I participated already in 2021 precisely on a United Nations program to start creating regulations that all the countries in the world could adopt, right? Regarding both neuroimplants and this whole idea of subtle subconscious cues. And so I do think that a lot of people are thinking about the things you're thinking, Nick. Then the other part that I heard across here about hardware not being ready and all of that, I want to boil it down to what I think devices are mostly for. And I would say they are for four things. One is health. Medical devices go through a different road, right? They require all these approvals. There is communication, there is entertainment, and there is productivity. And I do think that for a very large part of people, it only really comes back when you can do productivity. Either in the form of first line worker, or in the form of, you know, we work in front of a computer. The idea of changing for a different device is marginal, right? We just need to have more value added. And there are a number of things that are not, I mentioned before the multitasking, but you could list a number of things that you cannot do properly and hinder productivity. So I do think that those barriers are perhaps more about the software than the hardware. And then regarding hardware adoption, it's surprising, but for example, I heard of these friends who went to Lake Tahoe and used the Vision Pro, and the ski goggles and the Vision Pro are very similar. In fact, people wear helmets that are far more heavy than goggles for long periods, right? Maybe you drive a motorbike, maybe, you know, you go on the bicycle. There are a lot of moments in which we carry quite heavy things on the head. So I don't think it's about how heavy it is as much as it is how much value added. And then I do see a convergence toward more light device, right? The original phones were like a very big thing that you had to carry, and now it fits on your pocket. So I do think that the hardest problems sometimes are this extrapolation of finding and something that is not a local minimum. And I do think, I don't know how many people in the audience have tried the Vision Pro, but for me, it was very incredible that I entered there and I could see myself, maybe because I've worked on avatars for very long. But this idea of presence inside, I had never felt that before. And there is a demo of a small butterfly that comes around you. And I was like, man, I could live in this demo for the whole day. Haven't opened a single app, right? It's just I carry on with my normal life and I have a butterfly around me. So I do think that there are some of these spaces that perhaps we're being aiming too far to be like a game console for VR, right? Like we've forgotten that people need to click buttons inside VR.
Interesting. I never thought of you know, having a virtual companion, or you know, virtual pet that stays with you, sort of a comfort creature kind of. Interesting idea. So in terms of our technology, you know, there's is this a path towards sustainability, or is it a way for us to consume even more energy? You know, to be able, it takes a lot of processing to make this happen, to be able to really get an immersive experience. But there's other things that some of these technologies may enable, like telepresence, where at least on the Earth, where you have fairly low latencies, you know, reasonably low latencies, that you might be able to create an environment that lets you virtually be somewhere and maybe even physically interact with that environment. And this certainly would be part of the technology in it. Is this ultimately going to be a path towards that helps us to do more with less, if you will, or is it actually going to consume more energy than it saves ultimately? So I guess it's kind of a sustainability question. And Nick, maybe why don't you start off a short comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the short answer is yes. Clearly, we're going to be using more energy, and I mean, I think AI is the big gorilla in terms of energy usage here, because most of the graphics production and so forth that goes into an XR pipeline pales in comparison to the amount of energy that AI is going to use, or is currently using. And I do think AI has a significant role to play. I mean, going back to Mara's point about a butterfly companion, there's no reason that can't be an avatar for a smart AI, you know, Chat GPT or similar, that you can interact with, and it's your constant world companion. But yeah, that is going to use a significant amount of energy. Although I suppose we'll expend less if we're sitting on our couch all day. So,
well, that's what I was thinking. You know, if I don't have to travel, you know, if I don't have to travel somewhere, then you save a fair amount of energy there. But do you use more in terms of the processing power than you would if you actually flew somewhere? Yeah, just a curious question. I'm not sure what the answer is myself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
no, I
can,
agree.
I can weigh
Oh, go
in
ahead,
on
Jyotika.
that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Tom, thanks. Yeah, in my view, it's more of a double-edged sword. So I think that for sure, I mean, you know, more power consumption, more energy consumption, as we talked about, given the high processing needs for, you know, for running this application. However, because we are going to be doing more things in simulation in the virtual world versus relying on real world demonstrations, there will be that savings, you know, over there. So for example, so there was a report that the IEEE transmitter had published on the impact of technology in 2023 and beyond, and that is where it was described how this technology will be a major contributor to reducing carbon emissions, because it will allow us to do more with simulation rather than doing, you know, the real world experiments, right, on traditional energy. So I think there's this is the reason why I think it's a double-edged sword. I mean, quantifying one versus the other, and I guess, you know, as we mature, the technology will be able to really you know, optimize that power consumption and leverage more of this benefit. So that's where I would hope that we would be able to find a solution to proceed in that direction.
Thanks, Jyotika. So Mar, you actually work at Google, you're a big hyperscale company that does a lot of processing. What do you think about this in terms of, you know, is this going to help us in terms of reducing energy consumption, or is it going to be increased energy consumption?
I mean, one of the things that is happening right now is that none of us had to travel anywhere to
yes,
go
that's
there.
right. That's what I'm getting at. You know? Yeah.
And that is something that I find that if we really get to that point, then, and I'm very glad when I don't have to go to places anymore. I used to be very happy to go to places, but now I'm like, you know, your calendar fills. So I do think that there is an opportunity on that. I just read here on the chat that someone is saying that there is a virtual travel company already in Japan, Patrick.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I do think that more things like that will happen. It also allows for people who cannot travel to see these other things.
Yes, yes.
Regarding AI, I think it plays a gigantic role on making these real on the wild technologies. I think what we're seeing with the explosion of AI brings down to two things. One is we can start to conceive a world in which AI can understand everything. So we're seeing understanding, context awareness, all of these things will be doable by machines. I used to think that people were doing AR far too early, right? Like if we cannot even do VR where we know the hierarchy of objects, why are we trying to do something that we have so many unknowns? We don't even know the depth of different objects, the labeling, the semantics, all of these things, right? I do think that is a jump that AI is solving for immersive technologies, especially relevant for real life AR technologies, right? Like factory of the future. And then the other part of it is this generative AI, right? The part that is generating things or in-painting things. So once you're able, we published a paper on diffusion segmentation with the stable diffusion, where you can do zero shot and unsupervised segmentation of everything. So we have never trained the model, and we can segment any object in the scene, no matter how crowded. And then we can label it with the same technology, right? And that means you can have increasing vocabularies, open vocabulary type of scenarios. And then you just need to figure out a way to interact with those objects that you have segmented and maybe in-paint them, right? Like change that chair, or, you know, my bed is not done and I use that to have a much better, you know, the bed is now clean and done, and I'm working in a far less cluttered environment, and I have a more of a zen productive moment inside this technology that I have if I'm in the real world. I mean, I hope people still clean their houses, but you know what I mean? There might be moments in which you need this focus. And traditionally, these technologies have been accused of isolating. And I think isolating might be pretty fine. I would work on a monastery some days. I'll be like, oh, I know this, right? I don't even go to the office because I want to read papers or I need to review something. And so the problem is not that you can reach to monastery level, is that the transitions to other levels have not been found well, right? Transitioning in and out of the device. And I think all of these things are very enabled by AI. So I'm actually kind of very, and if AI can run on device, right? Like some models, we're seeing now this convergence into smaller models also. And I think that also makes it far better on energy consumption level. So I do think that, you know, there will be many more options than what we think in the future regarding models, AI, and energy consumption.
Okay, thanks. So let me just steer the discussion a different direction for a while. You know, are these metaverse ideas, you know, XR, whatever it is, can this be used to deal with accessibility issues, to allow people who otherwise could not contribute to be able to contribute, be able to participate in things, say somebody is paralyzed or something of that sort, or used for remote medical applications, or even used for instance, psychiatric treatments of various things, like, you know, helping somebody with PTSD. Can you guys make some comments on that? Maybe starting with you, Jotika. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. No, I think it's a great question, and I see that definitely, you know, as a benefit, you know, as you know, providing those, especially the remote healthcare benefits, you know, to folks who are unable to, you know, are in remote places, don't have access to the healthcare, or like mental health patients, or, you know, just others, as you said, that are physically not able to seek that medical care. So I think it's a great benefit for that, but also, you know, say we were to address the situation, another challenge, as we did in the during the pandemic. You know, I think even for students who found it, you know, really challenging given the lack of in-person interaction in a classroom, you know, this kind of would really help. I know my my son, for example, was in elementary school at the time, and so
Mm-hmm.
it was really hard to cope. So for sure, I think it would be great for those, as well as just the remote working, which is becoming more and more common now. Companies are hiring people all across the globe, who are not physically co-located with their companies. So I think, in general, I think for those kind of use cases, I think also for people wanting to, say, buy a new home, or do a virtual tour to not don't want to travel. Those kind of use cases are also beneficial. So yeah, I mean, I definitely see that. E-shopping was another one mentioned earlier, but yeah, and then we know about social media, but would be a good way to expand on that.
Nick, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, it's a little tricky because the use cases sound good, but for example, many of the people that would benefit the most from remote medicine, remote doctor consultation, there's just not the infrastructure in place.
They don't have connectivity, for instance. Yeah.
Exactly, right. They may not even have power on a reliable basis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a much bigger problem that I don't think the tech industry is well positioned to solve.
Okay, thanks. And Mar, what can you say about that in terms of some of the potentially positive, or helping with disabilities, with medical treatments, or monitoring, or things like that?
I've been very surprised by the advancements of these as actual deployments in medical settings, not just experiments. I used to follow closely the work by Daniel Freeman in University of Oxford regarding schizophrenia. And recently I was in Denmark this year and met this woman, Louise Birkendahl, and she's running real schizophrenia treatments. So in the Society for Neuroscience, we organized a panel a couple of years back. And one of the neuroscientists there was talking about how for health regarding brain, you can diagnose, but you can almost never cure. And I thought, oh my God, right? And so there are many things, like, for example, Louise Birkendahl was treating a woman who had 22 different voices of schizophrenia, right? They just appear and they are harmful. They ask very horrible things of her. So with technologies, he was able to, one, have an avatar that looked like she imagined the person, and then tune the voice to match. And then that person would be controlled by an experimenter, by a medical practitioner in her case. And then was able to learn to shut it down, to say like, no, I'm, gain the control. And she came down to having, I think, one or two voices which she had under control. And it was, there is a documentary in the Danish television about this. But she is deploying this for real in the hospital. And I was like, man, if this, this means that it's already happening. Of course, regarding the places where they need more medical assistance, that is not necessarily on the just simple medical assistance, not necessarily on neurology. I think this is kind of interesting, but many of the countries we will consider not to be very digital are actually very digital. Number one in the world on digital currency is Norway, and everybody would expect that. But the second one on digital currency is Somalia.
Wow.
Somalia opened its first ATM in 2014 and just became this very big, 70% of the population in Somalia uses only mobile money. Okay, so I do think that the digital infrastructure for some places, in the same way that we had in the Western world this industrial revolution, they might just skip it. It's kind of interesting. Maybe you can 3D print a table part, instead of have an IKEA. I don't know, right? So, but it's true that, for example, the whole idea of digital currency comes with devices that are portable and have batteries, both things that can happen both in, and are kind of wearables. You wear them in the pocket, but a headset is also a form of wearable. They need to become very, very cheap. But the whole idea is that in places where it's very dangerous to carry money, people actually find a way to not carry money and pay digitally. So I do think that there is perhaps less knowledge about how this is playing in many of these countries. They are adopting digital much faster than we think.
That's really interesting. And oh, by the way, there's a comment in the audience that kind of relates to a statement we had earlier. If you don't travel, for whatever reason, you have time to do other things, and those may consume more energy. So there's, you have to, if you're looking, sustainability is one thing, greater effectivity is another. There's interesting balances between these things, and I think
there was a study during the pandemic precisely about this, how everybody in their homes was consuming more than if we just went to the office.
Yeah.
So I do agree, there are secondary effects. It's a bit like regulations in general, right? Have secondary effects sometimes.
Yeah, thank you. Looking at the time, this may be our last question, but one of the things and we sort of got into this before, but what's going to be the impact on society if and assuming that these technologies do become more widespread, and what are ethical considerations we should consider? I mean, could this lead to new mass movements that could be bad or good? Do we have ways in which people can know the information? I mean, it's a general issue now that people can know the information or things that they might see in a virtual world, whether they relate to reality or are not, whether they're an opinion or a fact, things like that. And Nick, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's a big challenge, right? I mean, in the real world, when you walk into a neighborhood, we all have a set of senses for what we feel safe with and what we don't, right, based on prior experience and so forth. So if you walk into an area that you don't feel comfortable in, it's probably due to a whole bunch of previous experiences and triggers and things that you may not even be consciously aware of. And equally, if you walk into somewhere where you feel very comfortable and at home, it's for the same set of reasons. But those are all based on real physical cues, and the people that you see around you, the lighting, the temperature, the general ambience, etc. And of course, in a virtual world, all of that can be completely fabricated. So you literally don't know if the person you're talking to is actually the person you think it is. And now, with the most recent developments in generative AI, you need about 15 seconds of someone's voice to clone them very accurately indeed, right? I could easily pop up in VR and pretend to be Tom, and and nobody would be any of the wiser for if I was trying to perpetuate some sort of scam. It could be really quite difficult to know. And I do think that is a foundational problem that at the moment we don't have a good answer for. I mean, you've seen over the last decade, Twitter continually battle and other social media platforms, but continually try to battle fake news with relatively little success in the big scheme of things. So yeah, I don't think it's something that we have a good answer for.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Jyotika, what do you think about sort of the ethical, social implications of this technology as it becomes more widespread?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And my view is that on the plus side, this will help break those barriers with respect to our reach, extending our reach to different geos, different communities that we may not have easy access to give us more of that global reach and global perspective, reaching out to different communities across various geos. But on the flip side, I see that it would be an issue, both from a mental and physical health standpoint, a concern, for our children, for the next generation, for for with respect to the interaction, between with their peers, with um, not being able to have that in-person interaction, and also, kind of constraining the physical activity because of, being participating in that immersive virtual environment. So I think it would be detrimental from that standpoint, and we will need to find a solution to move forward to address those concerns.
Okay, thanks, Jyotika. Mara, what's your comments on that?
Exactly. Sorry, I just
Oh,
got
that's okay.
distracted.
No, I was asking about, sort of the social impact, ethical considerations as this technology becomes more widespread, like knowing if something's true or not, and,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah, I
the other
think this
side of
is
it, giving up physical for virtual interaction, the problems with that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there is something very interesting that is happening in our all these generations are transition generations, right? We did a transition to internet, and the aftermath is that we don't longer know what's true and false. And then when we transition to this idea that any content can be generated and you experience it, what is real and what is not, right? And someone was saying that digital currencies are going to this uh, scamming and more risky than paper or something, right? I don't necessarily think that's true, but I maybe because I'm a technologist, I tend to throw more technology to the problem. But I do think that, for example, blockchain might actually play a very big role as the notary of which things are real or not. For example, kind of like back in the day when you lived in the town and a kid would tell you a lie, and then you check with the rest of the people, and the people would tell you it's a lie, right? So, but then we live in these echo chambers where everybody tells the same lies on wherever we live in the internet. It's clearly isolated from all the other views. So I'm wondering the role of other technologies, and a lot of people have talked about Metaverse, the idea of a digital twin together with a Metaverse, and not a digital twin of everything, but of particular aspects. Maybe certain objects have a digital twin. Maybe people have a digital twin. Maybe your bank account has a digital twin, right? So, and everything is controlled with some sort of blockchain aspect. The other thing that I'm more concerned actually is the fact that perhaps access to sensors is not something that is being given to developers. So it would be on the other direction. People are like, oh, I don't want to give access, but then it doesn't really allow everybody to create. And as we have seen in other technologies, the creator economy is the one that, there are some people that live off YouTube, some people that live off Instagram, and there will be people who live out of some sort of metaverse equivalent. And I do generally consider the metaverse to be this very far-fetched and imaginary idea of living 24/7 inside one of these devices. And I think maybe some people will do that, but the rest of us might do it in a smaller dose, but still is applicable whatever we learn from that imagination experiment.
Thank you, Mara.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, thank you very much. So I think we're at just about at the end of our time here. What are people going to be able to stay on and continue talking if they wish, or what are the rules here?
So we are going to have we do have quite a few questions coming up, but
yeah.
For people, feel free to stick around and communicate. I mean, after the session is finished, we're going to enable the microphone, and we're going to enable the interactions, so people could discuss. There were
yeah, sorry. No, that's great. So you can have, I know there were a number of things that came up here, including links, which maybe some people had time to press on. I didn't, to follow up on here. So I think it's worthy of continuing conversation for those that are interested in that, whether it be now or can get back to folks.
Yeah, I mean, I've been monitoring the chat, and there are quite a few questions, and there's a lot of interest being raised. Started from equality to the variety of the equipment to the disadvantages to issues like motion sickness and VR sickness has popped up, and then there were some more technical things about haptics and sensory inputs. There was one particular question that was a long time ago, but I need to scroll up a bit. But that was quite interesting because it mentioned haptic touch and smell, and actually, bringing these elements into the experience. There were questions about implementing the metaverse in the workplace and how they can be used to actually use it as part of professional. Everyday professional day-to-day activities. I mean, it's quite a lot of this is a discussion that can go for a long time.
Indeed.
So, yeah.
No, and it's a very important discussion as well. By the way, there's a thing that I'd really love to see IEEE take to do something with. Maybe it's a standards activity, and that is data provenance. And I think some people touched on that. Maybe that's using blockchain or something. But there's some way of tracking where data comes from, where each piece of information comes from, that would allow you then to see, do things like, is it likely to be true or not? Or that may help in terms of curating data sets for AI training, things of that sort, which may be useful. One thing I've seen recently in the news is that Sony is working with I think it's AP, one of the big press organizations, on a camera with authenticity information built into the image. But things of that sort, I think, could be very, very useful for us, because ultimately we live in a physical world, but we gain much potentially by also participating in virtual worlds. But it would help us and help us in general if we can figure out what's true, what's not, or at least something that helps us to form our own opinions based upon where information probably came from. So anyway, thought there, I'd love to see something working on that, because it seems like that'd be very useful for us. So with that, I guess I've got to leave because I've got to get some other meetings. But Louis, can people stick around and continue conversations?
Yes, I would strongly recommend, and I would invite people to stick around and engage with the discussion. I wanna take a minute and thank you all. I know that you've got quite a busy schedule, and sharing all this brilliant information. And I also want to share. I also want to say a big thank you to the people who joined, both on the FrameVR and also from Zoom. That we had some people joining in. There's so many things that have been raised, and it's been a pleasure to have this panel. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tom, Geotica, Mar, and Nick. You guys have been amazing.